Hello again, everyone. So we're still in Chapter 11. We went over 11.1, and now we're going to do 11.2 and 11.3. So let's get right into it. And if you look at the review guide, you will see that there's going to be 4 different things that are going to be covered today in 11.2 and 11.3. So this should be a shorter video. So let's get through it. So we already talked about the psychodynamic perspective of personality. Now we're looking at the trait perspective, and this whole idea that what makes up our personality is a series of traits. And so what we mean by traits, and this is the first thing that you'll need to know, is that a trait is a relatively enduring personal characteristic. So it's kind of just the individual factors that then make up your overall personality. So a lot of times if somebody asks you to describe yourself, there's multiple things that you could say. Looking at the words that are even on this, if you're confident, a team player, a communicator, respectful, empathetic, kind, things like that. All of those are different traits that then together make up your personality. And there's all different types of individuals and researchers that came up with different ways of figuring out, okay, well, what traits matter? How many traits are there? And the first one we're going to talk about, and the one that you will need to know, is Gordon Alport, who believed that there was a hierarchy of traits. So it wasn't really, there's so many traits that make up your personality, but more that there's a different hierarchy of traits. So there's kind of more important a lower level versus the higher level. And what you will need to know on the exam is that when we talk about Alport, it is 3 different types of traits: the cardinal, the central, and the secondary. And what we mean by that is your cardinal traits are that highest level. So it's those really defining traits of who you are. The central traits are fairly good, but just kind of vague descriptions of who you are. So it's kind of your behavior across different situations. So if you're kind, if you're generous, if you're aggressive, if you're funny. It does describe you, it is a trait, but it's kind of more vague because it covers more ground. And then the very last kind of lowest level is those secondary traits. So these are things that don't necessarily, they still describe you, but not so much. So like your preference style of clothing or music. If I say I like classic music, that doesn't really speak too much to my personality, but it's still a part of who I am. It's still a part of my traits. So again, knowing for the exam with Alport, he had 3, and it was the cardinal, central, and secondary. Then we get into Cattell, and he believed that there were specific personality factors. 16 in fact. And when you were looking at these traits and these kind of factors, there were surface traits and then source traits. So surface traits was how you looked on the surface. If you were stubborn, if you were careless, aggressive, funny, things that people could see. Your source traits, though, was kind of that deeper level, the kind of underlying stuff that then made those surface traits. A person could be a kind person, but what's going on underneath the surface that causes them to be a kind person would then be those source traits. And then if you look and see on the right-hand side are those 16 personality factors, and it was kind of a spectrum. Looking at the very first one at the top, you could either be very, very reserved, very, very outgoing, or kind of somewhere in the middle. And the idea was that these 16 different factors then kind of came together to make up your personality. So it was kind of 16 different traits or factors that made up. So the thing that you will need to know for the exam is that Cattell had the 16 personality factor. The way that I like to remember this is Cattell has cat in it, and one of these days I will probably own 15 cats. I'm at 3 so far, but I'm sure I'll get more. Then we get into the big 5. or the five-factor model. And this was the idea that, unlike Cattell, that thought that there were 16, or Alport, where it's just kind of different types versus a specific number, the big five believed that there was, well, 5. And you fell either, again, it was on a spectrum, you were either all the way on one side, all the way on the other, or somewhere in between. And so you'll see that the big five, there's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism. And you'll see that this kind of describes what they all mean. And you could either be on one side of the spectrum or the other. So, the kind of classic one that I like, and you'll see this come up a few times, is extroversion versus introversion. So are you an extrovert or an introvert? It's believed that, this is kind of a big part, or, a big trait that then makes up your personality. And a little background of the big five. This is one of the tests that has been found to be universal. So when they look at personality types and they use the big five, it seems to be effective and reliable across different cultures, which not all of these tests can say. And a good way of remembering the big five, you can't quite see it here, but if you rearrange the beginning letters, it spells ocean, so O-C-E-A-N. So that's just one way of remembering the big five. When we look at the big five, you'll see where different majors in college fall for these different traits. So, see if the major that you are interested in going in is up there, and if it seems to match with the kind of personality traits that similar people going for the same major have. And this is just a quick little overview of the ones that we talked about. We didn't talk about Hans Eysenck. But the other ones we did. Alright, so going straight into the next one. See, I told you this was going to be quick. We're going to talk about the social cognitive perspective. So instead of looking at individual traits that make up the personality, this is again going into a perspective. And so it's looking at a combination of things. So of course when you look at social cognitive theory, you see social and cognitive. So this believed theory believed that our personality, how we behaved, how we presented ourselves, wasn't just learned behavior, like classical behaviorism would believe, but it was also these cognitions, so how we think and evaluate a situation, the expectancies of the outcome of how we behave, learning, and then the social aspects of the behavior. So again, how are we supposed to be acting? What kind of personalities would benefit in this situation? That sort of thing. And I believe that all those things worked together. And there was also this idea of the locus of control. So it can either be internal or external. And it believed, and this was a huge part of personality, that you either feel like you have the control of a situation or you don't have control. And this is something we go into more when we talk about social psychology, which is a part of this. But when it comes to locus of control, we do find that when things go wrong, when we make mistakes, we tend to have more of an external locus of control. So, I got a bad grade on that test because it was difficult. The teacher didn't go over all of the material. So, it's stuff outside of a person's control. Whereas when things go well, we tend to associate with an internal locus of control. So, I did really good on that exam because I studied really hard. So we like to kind of take that control on the good things, and then, it's someone else's fault for the bad things. But getting kind of ahead of myself. We talk about that more in social psychology. For the exam, you will need to know Albert Bandura's idea of reciprocal determinism. And this is the whole idea that there's these three main factors. You have cognitions, environment, and behavior. And it was the idea that all of these influence one another. So again, the way that you think about a situation is affected by the environment that you're in. But it's also affected by, the behavior that you have. But your behavior is affected by the way that you think, or your cognitions, and your behavior is also affected by your environment. And again, and the environment is affected by behavior, and the environment is also affected by the way that you think. So it's this whole idea that all of these three things, which you will need to know for the exam, affect one another. They influence one another. And that is reciprocal determinism. Because again, reciprocal or reciprocity is this whole idea of like, you do something for me, I do something for you. It's going back and forth, and influencing one another to then determine your personality. And again, this is just quickly going over what we talked about. Traditional behaviorism, for the perspective of personality, would say it's just learned behavior. You know, the reason why you are the way you are and you behave the way you are is that's how you were taught. That's what you saw. It's what you learned. The social cognitive theory, though, kind of takes that a step further, and it says, you know, it's not just the way you were taught, but, you know, you're evaluating the situation that you're in. You're looking at the society you're in. You're thinking about the outcome, what's expected of you, and then that is then influencing your behavior and then ultimately your personality. And as promised, that was a very quick video going over module 11.3 and 11.4. And so when we come back, we will be finishing, or sorry, that was 11.2 and 11.3. When we come back, we will be doing 11.4 and 11.5 together in a video. So I can go through those two relatively quickly. And then there's going to be a fun activity we're going to do at the end. So I will see you guys for that one.